Chapter 82. How after making the agreement, the rebels went to Zaragoza, saying that they would embark in the 2 ships the admiral was sending them. Matters having been arranged as told above, Carvajal and Salamanca returned to Santo Domingo, and on November 21st, at their urging, the admiral signed the articles that they brought, and again granted safe conduct to all who did not wish to go to Castile with Roldan, promising them wages or land grants on the island, as they chose, and inviting the others to come and arrange everything to their liking. On November 24th, Ballester delivered the admiral's letter to Roldan and his comrades at Concepcion, whereupon they set out for Zaragoza to prepare their departure. The admiral knew how wicked were these men, and he was grieved that by giving them those ships, the Adelantado was prevented from continuing the exploration of the mainland of Paria and putting in order the pearl fishery and its trade. But he did not want to give the rebels any excuse for charging that he did not intend to give them the free passage home he had promised. He therefore began to fit out the ships, and the work being slowed by the lack of provisions, in order not to lose time, he ordered Carvajal to go overland to Zaragoza with full power to collect supplies and do whatever was necessary to have the rebels ready to sail while the ships were voyaging thither. He then set out for Isabella to look after the safety of that place, leaving Don Diego in charge at Santo Domingo. At the end of January 1499, following the admiral's departure, the caravels Nina and Santa Cruz, provided with all they needed for the voyage, finally sailed to embark the rebels. However, a great storm that arose on the passage forced them to put in another port till the end of March. As the Nina was in bad need of repairs, the admiral ordered Pedro de Arana and Francisco de Garay to proceed to Zaragoza in the Santa Cruz without her. Later, Carvajal sailed to Zaragoza in the Nina instead of going overland. The voyage required 11 days, and he found the Santa Cruz awaiting him there. Chapter 83. How the rebels resolved not to go to Castile, and made a new pact with the admiral. Meanwhile, since the ships were delayed in coming, and most of Roldan's men did not really wish to leave the island, they charged the admiral with having delayed the dispatch of those ships, and used this delay as a pretext for remaining there. When he learned of this, the admiral wrote Roldan and Adrian de Mujica, urging them to abide by their agreement, and Carvajal, who was with them in Zaragoza, protested on April 20th before a public notary named Francisco de Garay, later governor of Panuco in Jamaica, that the admiral had sent those ships in good order. They should therefore take them and embark according to the agreement. As they would not do it, on April 25th, he ordered the ships to return to Santo Domingo, because the shipworms were destroying them, and the crews were suffering severely from lack of provisions. This did not dismay the rebels. On the contrary, they were gay and puffed up with pride that so much was being made of them. Not only did they show no gratitude for the admiral's efforts in their behalf, but they wrote, charging him with responsibility for their staying. They declared that out of spite he had delayed sending the caravels, which in any case were in such wretched state that they could never reach Castile. And even if the ships were seaworthy, they had consumed their provisions in waiting and could not get more for a long time. They had therefore decided to stay and seek redress from the Catholic sovereigns. Carvajal returned overland to Santo Domingo with this answer. At the time of his departure, Roldan told him that if the admiral sent another safe conduct, he would gladly confer with him in an effort to reach a satisfactory agreement. Carvajal transmitted this message to the admiral in a letter that he sent from Santo Domingo on May 15th. The admiral replied on the 21st of May, thanking Carvajal for his efforts in this business and sending the safe conduct he had asked for, together with a brief but strongly worded letter for Roldan, appealing to him to live in peace and obedience to the Catholic sovereigns. After the messenger had left for Santo Domingo, he wrote again in more detail on June 24th. On August 3rd, 6 or 7 of the admiral's lieutenants sent Roldan another safe conduct, that he might come to confer with his lordship. The distance being so great, however, and the admiral having occasion to visit that country, he decided to sail with 2 caravels to the port of Azua, which is west of Santo Domingo, in order to be nearer to the province where were the rebels, many of whom came to the port. The admiral arrived at the end of August and entered into negotiations aboard his flagship with the rebel leaders. He urged them to abandon their evil courses and promised them great rewards and favors. They replied they would do what he asked if he granted them 4 things. First, he should allow 15 of them to return to Castile in the first ships that should come from Spain. Second, those who chose to stay should be given houses and grants of land in lieu of their pay. Third, he should publicly proclaim that all that had happened was caused by false testimony of a few evil men. Fourth, he should restore Roldan to his office of perpetual alcalde mayor. After the admiral had agreed to these things, Roldan returned ashore and submitted the new articles to his followers. So arbitrary and unreasonable were these articles that a final one empowered the rebels to use force or any other means to make the admiral comply if he was remiss in carrying any of them out. But the admiral was eager to put an end to this wretched business which had dragged on for 2 years, for he saw that the number and obstinacy of his foes were growing, and that many of his own people were plotting to form new gangs and go off by themselves, as Roldan had done. So he decided to sign whatever they put before him and issued 2 orders. One, appointing Roldan alcalde mayor for life, and another, granting the aforesaid 4 demands. He also confirmed all that was contained in the text of the letter given above. On Tuesday, November 5th, Roldan began to exercise the duties of his office, and by the power vested in him, he appointed Pedro de Riquelme, judge of Bonao, with power to punish culprits in all except capital crimes. Capital offenders were sent to the fort of Concepcion for trial by Roldan. Master and man being cut out of the same cloth, Riquelme set about building a stronghold in Bonao but was stopped by Pedro de Arana, who understood that this work was to the detriment of the admiral. Chapter 84. How Ojeda, returning from his voyage of discovery, caused new disorders on Hispaniola. Having settled his dispute with Roldan, the admiral appointed a captain with a force of men to patrol and pacify the island. They were to compel the Indians to pay tribute, and at the first sign of a revolt by Christians or Indians, hasten to crush it and punish the rebels. He did this because he wanted to leave for Castile, taking the Adelantado with him, for he knew that if the latter remained as governor, it would be difficult to bury old grudges. As he was preparing to embark, Alonso de Ojeda arrived at the island from a voyage of exploration with 4 ships. September 5th, Ojeda put in the port that the Christians call Brazil, and the Indians Yaquimo, to cut logwood and capture Indian slaves. While busied with this, he did all other mischief he could. To show that he was Bishop Fonseca's minion, he attempted to cause a new revolt by giving out that Queen Isabella was at death's door, and that on her death the admiral would be without a protector, and that he, as the bishop's good and loyal servant, could do what injury he pleased to the admiral, because of the enmity between these two. In addition to spreading this rumor, he began to write to and have dealings with some men who had played a dubious part in the late troubles. Being told of Ojeda's actions and plans, Roldan, by order of the admiral, marched against him with 26 men. On September 29th, he learned that Ojeda was only 1.5 leagues away, in the village of a chief named Heneguayaba, where he was making cassava bread and biscuit. Wishing to catch him unawares, Roldan journeyed all that night. Discovering that Roldan was in pursuit of him and lacking the means to resist his pursuer, Ojeda made a virtue of necessity and came out to meet Roldan with a plea that want of provisions had forced him to seek supplies in this land which belonged to his royal masters, the Catholic sovereigns, but that he meant injury to none. He gave Roldan an account of his voyage, stating that he had come from exploring for a distance of 600 leagues westward along the coast of Paria. There he had encountered Indians who fought the Christians very bravely, wounding 20 of his men. This had prevented him from exploiting the riches of that country, where he found stags, rabbits, tiger skins and paws, and guanines. He showed Roldan samples of these things aboard the caravels. He said he wanted to depart immediately for Santo Domingo to report to the admiral about all he had seen and done. At this time the admiral was much troubled, because Riquelme, judge of Bonao by appointment of Roldan, had begun, with the pretext of building a fold for his cattle, to build a stronghold on a hill from which he could sally with a few people to do what mischief he pleased. Arana had therefore stopped him from continuing that work. Riquelme then began a lawsuit, taking the testimony of witnesses and sending the proceedings to the admiral with a complaint that Arana had used force against him. He prayed the admiral to intervene in order to avoid greater disorders. The admiral suspected him of harboring worse designs, but he thought best to dissemble his suspicions while remaining on guard, for he felt he had enough to do to handle Ojeda's open defiance. Meanwhile, Ojeda persisted in his wicked course. In February 1500, taking leave of Roldan, he sailed for Zaragoza, where lived many of the men who had revolted with Roldan. As greed and self-interest are the most certain means of inciting men to evil, he announced to those people that the Catholic sovereigns had appointed him and Carvajal to be the admiral's advisors, lest the admiral do something harmful to the royal interests. He said, moreover, that one of the things the sovereigns had ordered was that the admiral should immediately pay in ready money the wages of all who served their highnesses on the island. Since the admiral appeared unwilling to do this, he, Ojeda, offered to lead them to Santo Domingo to force him to pay up immediately. Afterward, they could throw the admiral out of the island dead or alive. In no other way could the admiral be made to keep his word or the pact he had signed. With these promises, Ojeda persuaded many to follow him, and with their aid, he fell one night on those who opposed his plan, and there were dead and wounded on both sides. Being convinced that Roldan, having rejoined the admiral's service, would not support this new conspiracy, the rebels decided to attack him unawares and make him prisoner. But Roldan got wind of their scheme and marched with a strong force to punish Ojeda and crush the revolt. Ojeda took fright and retreated to his ships, and the one from shore and the other from aboard ship wrangled where they should hold their conference, each fearing to place himself in the power of the other. As Ojeda would not come ashore, Roldan offered to come aboard to speak with him. He asked Ojeda to send him a boat, which Ojeda did. After the boat had taken Roldan and his men in, the latter rose up and fell upon Ojeda's men, killing some and wounding others. Then they rowed the boat ashore. Ojeda now was reduced to a single boat for all his ships. He therefore decided to go peacefully ashore to negotiate with Roldan. He sought to excuse his misdeeds and agreed to release some of Roldan's men that he had captured. In return, he asked Roldan to restore his boat and crew, for he faced certain ruin having no other boat fit for use. Roldan wanted to give Ojeda no cause for complaint, so agreed, but he first drew from Ojeda a pledge that he and his men would leave Hispaniola in a certain space of time. To ensure compliance, he kept a strong guard ashore until Ojeda left. But just as a bad weed is not so easily uprooted that it will not grow again, so men of evil habits are with difficulty kept from relapsing into their old courses, as happened with some of the rebels after Ojeda had sailed away. One Don Hernando de Guevara, who was in disgrace with the admiral as a seditious person, had joined Ojeda out of hatred for Roldan, because the latter had restrained him from taking for wife a daughter of Anacaona, the principal queen of Zaragua. He lured many into a conspiracy to capture Roldan, planning to succeed him as Lord of Misrule. He especially egged on Adrian de Mujica, one of the principal rebel leaders, and some other villains, and mid-June 1500, they agreed to imprison or kill Roldan. But Roldan was on his guard, penetrated their designs, and managed to capture Don Hernando, Adrian, and the other leaders of the gang. He then notified the admiral of what had happened, and asked him what he should do with the ringleaders. The admiral replied that they had disturbed the peace without cause, and it would be the ruin of the country if they went unpunished. Roldan should punish them as their crimes and the law required. The alcalde mayor promptly brought them to trial, summarily ordered Adrian de Mujica, the author of the conspiracy, to be hanged, banished the others from the country as their offenses required, and held Don Hernando in prison until June 13th, when he handed him over with other prisoners to Gonzalo Blanco to convey to the Vega, where the admiral was at the time. This chastisement served to quiet the country. The Indians once more obeyed and served the Christians, and so many gold mines were discovered that all left the royal service and went out prospecting for gold, paying the king a third of all they found. They did so well that one man gathered 5 marks of rather large gold nuggets in a single day. One of them was worth more than 196 ducats. The Indians obeyed and feared the admiral. They were so eager to please him that they voluntarily offered to become Christians. And if an Indian chief had to appear before him, he took care to come dressed. For the greater security of the island, the admiral decided to make a tour of it, and on Wednesday, February 20th, 1499, he and the Adelantado left Santo Domingo for Isabela, where they arrived on March 19th. From there they departed on April 5th for Concepcion, arriving there the next Tuesday. From this place, the Adelantado left for Zaragua Friday, June 7th, the day after Christmas Day, 1499. All having left me, I was attacked by the Indians and the bad Christians and was placed in such extremity that fleeing death, I took to sea in a small caravel. Then our Lord aided me, saying, Man of little faith, do not fear, I am with thee. And he dispersed my enemies and showed me how I might fulfill my vows. Unhappy sinner that I am, to have placed all my hopes in the things of this world. February 3rd, 1500. The admiral set out for Santo Domingo, intending to return to Castile and give the Catholic sovereigns an account of all that had happened. Chapter 85. How, as a result of false reports and complaints of certain persons, the Catholic sovereigns sent a judge to the Indies to learn what was happening there. While these disorders went on, many of the rebels, riding from Hispaniola, and others who had returned to Castile, continually made false charges to the Catholic sovereigns and their royal council against the admiral and his brothers, claiming they were cruel and unfit to govern, because they were foreigners and had no experience in governing men of quality. These rebels declared that if their highnesses did not intervene, it would lead to the total ruin of the Indies. And even if ruin were avoided, the admiral would in time rebel and form an alliance with some foreign prince, claiming the Indies were his possession because he had discovered them by his own efforts and industry. That, said they, was why the admiral sought to conceal the wealth of that country and did not allow the Indians to serve the Christians or be converted to our faith, hoping thereby to win them to his side and use them against their highnesses. With these and similar calumnies, they importuned the Catholic sovereigns, complaining that the Spaniards at Hispaniola had not been paid for these many years past. This was the subject of complaint and grumbling by all the malcontents at court. I remember that when I was at Granada, at the time of the death of Prince Miguel, more than 50 of these shameless wretches brought a quantity of grapes and sat down to eat them in the court of the Alhambra, loudly proclaiming that their highnesses and the admiral had reduced them to that pitiful state by withholding their pay, adding many other insolent remarks. They were so shameless that if the Catholic king rode out, they would crowd out about him, shouting, Pay! Pay! If my brother and I, who were pages to the queen, happened by, they followed us, crying, There go the sons of the admiral of the mosquitoes, of him who discovered lands of vanity and illusion, the grave and ruin of Castilian gentlemen, adding so many other insults that we took care not to pass before them. As a result of these endless complaints and appeals to the king's favorites, the king decided to send a judge to Hispaniola, who should inform himself about these matters. In case this judge found the admiral guilty of the things charged, he should send him home and remain as governor of the island. The Catholic sovereigns selected as their agent Francisco de Bobadilla, Knight Commander of the Order of Calatrava. On May 21st, 1499, at Madrid, they granted him full and unlimited powers, with orders in blank, bearing the signature of the sovereigns and commanding the persons on Hispaniola to whom they were shown to extend him all aid and favor. Bobadilla arrived at Santo Domingo at the end of August, 1500. At the time, the admiral was in Concepcion, restoring order in that province where the Adelantado had been attacked by the rebels, and where there were the greatest number of Indians, superior in all respects to all the others of the island. So Bobadilla, finding no one whom he must take into account, promptly took the admiral's home, and all that he found there, as if it were his by lawful succession and inheritance. He gathered about him all the former rebels and many others, who hated the admiral and his brothers, and proclaimed himself governor. To gain popularity, he issued an order exempting all from payment of tribute for 20 years. He summoned the admiral to appear before him without delay in the name of the Catholic sovereigns. In proof of this, on September 7th, he sent Fray Juan de Trasiera to him with the following royal order. Don Christopher Columbus, our admiral of the ocean sea, we have sent the Knight Commander Francisco de Bobadilla, the bearer of this letter, to say certain things to you in our behalf. We desire you to give him full faith and credit and to act accordingly. From Madrid, May 26, 1499, I, the King, I, the Queen, by the order Miguel Perez de Almazan. Chapter 86. How the admiral was imprisoned and sent to Castile in chains, together with his brothers. As soon as he had read the letter from the Catholic sovereigns, the admiral left for Santo Domingo. On his arrival, Bobadilla, who was most anxious to remain in office, neither held a hearing nor took any evidence. Instead, early in October, 1500, he put the admiral and his brother Diego in chains aboard ship under a strong guard. He forbade anyone publicly to mention them on pain of very severe penalties. He then held a farcical inquest, taking testimony from their open enemies, the rebels, and showing public favor to and even egging on all who wished to speak ill of the prisoners. From the wicked and shameless things these people said, one had to be blind not to see that they were guided by prejudice rather than truth. That is why the Catholic sovereigns would not believe the testimony and ultimately cleared the admiral of those charges. Indeed, the sovereigns repented they had ever sent Bobadilla on that mission, and with good reason, for he destroyed the island and dissipated the royal revenues and tributes in order to gain popularity for himself, proclaiming that the Catholic sovereigns wanted only the title of dominion for themselves and their subjects to have all the profits. But Bobadilla did not neglect his own interests. He hobnobbed with the richest and most powerful men on the island, assigning Indians to work for them on condition that they share with him all they got by that means. And he sold at public auction the property and estates that the admiral had gained for the Catholic sovereigns, declaring the sovereigns were not laborers or merchants and wanted no profit from the Indies, but only wished to help and relieve the needs of their subjects. With this pretext, he auctioned off everything, but saw to it that some of his cronies acquired this property for 1/3 of its value. He subverted justice to the same end of enriching himself and gaining popularity, because he still feared that the Adelantado, who had not yet returned from Zaragoza, might stop his progress and free the admiral by force. Actually, the brothers of the admiral had displayed much self-restraint in this regard, for the admiral had advised them that in order to serve the Catholic sovereigns and not cause disorders, they should surrender to Bobadilla peaceably. Thereby, on arrival in Castile, they would the more easily secure Bobadilla's punishment and the righting of their wrongs. This moderation did not deter Bobadilla from seizing the admiral and his brothers. He even permitted the malcontents and rabble to shout innumerable insults at them in the public squares, to blow horns in the harbor when they were being taken aboard, and to post scandalous handbills about them on the street corners. Although he knew that one Diego Ortiz, the governor of the hospital, had publicly read a handbill in the town square, he not only did not punish him, but showed much glee over it, which made all the others seek to outdo each other in devising taunts and insults. At the time of the admiral's departure, Bobadilla, fearing he might escape by swimming ashore, ordered the shipmaster Andres Martin to turn him over to Bishop Fonseca bound in chains. It was generally believed that all Bobadilla did was with the approval and advice of the bishop. As soon as they had put to sea, the skipper, who had come to know Bobadilla's malice, offered to remove his chains, but the admiral refused. He had been placed in chains in the sovereign's name, he said, and would wear them until the sovereigns ordered them removed, for he was resolved to keep those chains as a memorial of how well he had been rewarded for his many services. And this he did, for he always saw them in his bedroom, and he wanted them buried with his bones. On November 20th, 1500, he wrote the sovereigns that he had arrived at Cadiz. As soon as they learned that he came in chains, they ordered him set free, and wrote expressing their goodwill toward him and their displeasure at Bobadilla's harsh treatment of him. They requested the admiral to come to court, assuring him that he would be treated with honor and his affairs settled with dispatch. Yet I cannot absolve the Catholic sovereigns of responsibility for selecting for the post of governor such a bad and ignorant man as Bobadilla. Had he been a person who understood the duties of his office, the admiral himself would have rejoiced at his coming, for in his letters he had pleaded with the sovereigns to send out someone who should inform himself of the wicked deeds committed by the rebels, in order that they might be punished with fitting severity by another than himself, who might be charged with partiality because the outbreaks had been directed against his brother. It may be urged that even if the Catholic sovereigns had unfavorable reports about him, they should not have given Bobadilla such unlimited powers. On the other hand, in view of the many complaints they had received against the admiral, it is not strange they did so. Chapter 87. How the admiral went to court to report to the Catholic sovereigns. As soon as the Catholic sovereigns learned of the admiral's arrival and that he came in chains, they gave orders, December 17th, that he be placed at liberty, and wrote him to come to Granada. There their highnesses received him with friendly and affectionate greetings, assuring him that his imprisonment had not been by their wishes or command, that they were much displeased by it, and would see to it that the guilty parties were punished and he was given satisfaction for his wrongs. With these and similar gracious words, they ordered his business promptly attended to. In fine, they decided to send out a governor to Espanola who should right the wrongs done to the admiral and his brothers. Bobadilla should be commanded to make restitution of the admiral's property. The admiral would receive all that belonged to him according to the capitulations between him and the sovereigns, and the rebels were to be tried and punished as their offenses deserved. Accordingly, the sovereign sent out Don Nicolas de Ovando, knight commander of Lares, a wise and prudent man, yet a crafty one, inclined to credit the words of malicious and scheming men, and capable of cruelty and a vengeful spirit, as he showed in putting to death the 80 caciques in Zaragoza. At the time the sovereigns decided to send out the said knight commander, they also resolved to dispatch the admiral on another voyage, from which they might derive some profit, and with which he might be occupied only until Ovando had pacified the island of Hispaniola. They did not think it fair to keep him from his rightful possessions any longer than was necessary, knowing as they did that the charges made against him by Bobadilla were compounded of malice and falsehood, and were no just cause for him to be stripped of his rights and privileges. The start of this voyage being somewhat delayed, and knowing that some of his enemies were urging that the sovereigns delay it further, pending the arrival of new information against him, the admiral in October 1501 asked the sovereigns in person to promise to defend and protect his rights and privileges. He later made the same request of them in a letter. They made this promise to him on the eve of his departure in a letter containing the following: "Be assured that your imprisonment was very displeasing to us, as we made clear to you and to all others, for as soon as we learned of it we caused you to be set free. You know the favor with which we have always treated you, and now we are even more resolved to honor and treat you very well. All that we have granted you shall be preserved intact, according to the privileges that you have received from us, and you and your heirs shall enjoy them, as is just, without any contravention. And if it should be necessary to confirm them anew, we shall do so, and we shall order your son placed in possession of everything. For it is our wish to honor you and reward you, and more than this. And be assured we shall look after your sons and brothers, as is just, and your office shall be vested in your son. But all this can be attended to after you have sailed. We therefore pray you not to delay your departure. From Valencia de la Torre, March 14th, 1502. I the King, I the Queen." The sovereigns made these promises and offers to the admiral because he had resolved to have nothing more to do with the affairs of the Indies, and to turn them over to my brother, concerning which he reasoned well. For, said he, if the services he had already performed did not suffice to secure the punishment of those wicked men, his future services would avail even less. He had already accomplished the main thing that he had offered to do before his discovery of the Indies, namely, to show that there were islands and a continent to the west, that the way thither was easy and navigable, the advantages plain, and the inhabitants very gentle and unarmed. And since he had personally verified all this, it remained only for their highnesses to continue what he had begun, sending out people to discover the secrets of those countries. Now the gate was open. Anyone could follow the coast, as some were already doing, who improperly called themselves discoverers, not considering that they had not discovered any new land, but only followed in the wake of the admiral, after he had shown them the way to those islands and the province of Paria, which was the first part of the continent to be discovered. However, since the admiral had always had a great desire to serve the Catholic sovereigns, and especially the most serene queen, he was content to return to his labors and make the voyage to be told of hereafter. For he was convinced that new treasures would be found daily, as he had earlier written to their highnesses in reference to the discovery. It must be followed up, because it is certain that if not now, then later some new thing of great value will be found. New Spain and Peru have since shown the truth of this observation, but at the time nobody believed what he said. Yet he said nothing that did not prove in time to be true, as the Catholic sovereigns wrote in a letter that they sent him from Barcelona on September 5th, 1493. Chapter 88. How the admiral left Granada for Seville to outfit a fleet for his voyage of discovery. After the admiral had taken leave of the Catholic sovereigns, he left Granada for Seville in the year 1501, and on arrival there set about preparing the fleet. In this he showed such diligence that in a short time he had rigged and made ready 4 ships with round tops, the largest one being of 70 tons burthen, and the smallest of 50 tons, with 140 men and boys all told, myself being one. On May 9th, 1502, we set sail from the harbor of Cadiz, and made for Santa Catalina, whence we sailed again on Wednesday, the 11th of the month, for Arcilla, to succor the Portuguese. They were said to be in dire straits, but when we arrived, the Moors had already raised the siege. The admiral sent ashore his brother, the Adelantado, Don Bartholomew Columbus, and myself, together with the ship captains, to call on the captain of Arcilla, who had been wounded by the Moors in an assault. He gave profuse thanks to the admiral for this courtesy and for the offer of help, sending aboard certain of his gentlemen. Some of these proved to be cousins of Dona Felipa de Moniz, who had been the admiral's wife in Portugal. That day we set sail and arrived at the Gran Canaria on May 20th, anchoring in the Isletas. The 24th we proceeded to Maspalomas, which is on the same island, to take on water and wood for the voyage. The next night we set course for the Indies, with God's aid making a prosperous voyage, so that without having to touch the sails, we arrived at the island of Matanino on the morning of Wednesday, June 15th, with a rather rough sea and wind. There, as is the need and custom of those who come from Spain, the admiral took on wood and water, and made the men wash their linen, staying until Saturday, when we stood to the westward of the island, and came to Dominica, which is 10 leagues distant. Running down the Caribbee Islands, we came to Santa Cruz, and on the 24th of the same month we ran along the south side of the island of San Juan. Thence we took the way to Santo Domingo, the admiral wishing to trade one of his ships for another, because she was a crank and a dull sailor. Not only was she slow, but she could not load sails without bringing the side of the ship almost under water, which caused a good deal of trouble on that voyage. The admiral's intention had been to reconnoiter the coast of Paria, and cruise down it until he came to the Strait, which he felt must be in the vicinity of Veragua and Nombre de Dios, but because of that poor ship, he had to go to Santo Domingo to trade her for a better. The knight commander of Lares, governor of the island, who had been sent by the Catholic sovereigns to hold an inquest into Bobadilla's administration, took no notice of our unexpected arrival on Wednesday, June 29th. Having come to off the harbor, the admiral sent Captain Pedro de Terreros, captain of one of the ships, to explain to the knight commander that because he had to replace one of his ships, and also because he expected a great storm, he wished to take shelter in port. The admiral also advised him not to permit the homeward-bound fleet to sail for 8 days because of the great danger. The knight commander, however, would not permit the admiral to enter the port, much less would he detain the fleet that was homeward-bound for Castile. This fleet, consisting of 28 ships, carried the knight commander Bobadilla, who had made prisoners the admiral and his brothers, Francisco Roldan, and all the other rebels who had done the admiral so much hurt. God was pleased to close the eyes and minds of all those men, so that they did not heed the admiral's good advice. I am certain that this was divine providence, for had they arrived in Castile, they would never have been punished as their crimes deserved. On the contrary, as protégés of Bishop Fonseca, they would have received many favors and thanks. But their departure from that port for Castile prevented this. On reaching the eastern end of Hispaniola, the storm assailed them with such fury that the flagship carrying Bobadilla and most of the rebels went down. And it did such havoc among the rest that only 3 or 4 out of the 28 weathered the tempest. This happened on Thursday, the last day of June, and the admiral, being forbidden the harbor, anchored as close as he could under the land in order to save himself. This caused much grief and chagrin to the ship's crews, who on account of being with the admiral were denied the hospitality that should be accorded to foreigners, and all the more to men of the same nation. They also feared that if some disaster should befall, they could expect no aid from ashore. Inwardly, the admiral felt the same grief and bitterness, especially when he reflected that in a time of mortal danger, he was being denied refuge in the land that he had given to Spain for its honor and exaltation. By his skill and good judgment, he managed to keep the fleet together till the next day, when as the storm gained in intensity and night came on with deep darkness, 3 ships were torn from their anchorages, each going its own way. And though all ran the same danger, each thought the others had gone down. The worst sufferers were the men on the Santo, who, to save their boat, in which Captain Terreros had gone ashore, dragged it astern by cables until they were forced to cut it loose in order to save themselves. Still greater was the danger of the caravel Bermuda, which ran out to sea, where water washed over her deck, from which it is easy to understand why the admiral wanted to trade her for another. All concluded that the Adelantado, the admiral's brother, was under God the saving of her, for there was not at that time a more skillful sailor than he. After all the ships, save the admiral's, had taken great punishment, it pleased God to bring them together the next Sunday to their rendezvous in the harbor of Azua, on the south side of Hispaniola. As each captain related his misfortunes, it appeared that the Adelantado, experienced seaman that he was, had weathered that great storm by going out to sea, while the admiral had saved his ship by lying close to shore, like a sage astrologer, who foresaw whence the danger must come. That is why the admiral's enemies charged that by his magic arts he had raised that storm to take revenge on Bobadilla and others of his enemies who were with him, seeing that not one of his 4 ships went down, while of the 28 which had left with Bobadilla only one, and that one of the meanest, the Aguja, reached Spain safely with 4,000 pesos of gold from the admiral's revenues that his factor was bringing home. 3 others that rode out the storm had to return to Santo Domingo in a battered and pitiful state. Chapter 89. How the admiral departed from Hispaniola to continue his voyage and discover the Guanaja Islands. During their stay in the harbor of Azua, the admiral permitted his men to rest from the ordeal of that storm, and since fishing is one of the pleasures offered by the sea in such time of idleness, I shall describe two remarkable kinds of fish among the many they caught. One I recall with amusement, the other with wonderment. The first was a ray, as large as a medium-sized bed, which the men on the Vizcaína stabbed with a harping iron while it slept on the surface, and held fast so it could not escape. And being tied to the boat by a long thick rope, it drew the boat through the harbor as swiftly as an arrow. The men aboard ship, not knowing what went on, were astounded to see the boat running about without oars. Eventually the fish died and was hauled aboard with tackling gear used for raising heavy objects. The second fish was caught by another means. The Indians call it manatee, and it is not known in Europe. It is big as a calf and resembles one in taste and color, but is better tasting and fatter. And those who believe that all manner of land animals live in the sea argue the manatee is not a fish, but a calf, since it does not look like a fish and feeds only on the grass it finds along the shore. After the men had rested and the ships had been repaired, the admiral departed from Azua harbor and went to the harbor of Brazil, which the Indians call Yaquimo, to take shelter from an impending storm. He left this port on July 14th and ran into such a flat calm that he could not hold his course, and the currents carried him to some small sandy islands near Jamaica. He called them the Puddles, because though they had no wells, his men found enough water for their needs by digging puddles in the sand. Then, sailing south toward the continent, we came to some islands and went ashore on the largest. It was called Guanaja, which name the mapmakers later gave to all the Guanajas. These islands lie 12 leagues from the mainland, near the province now called Cape Honduras, but which the admiral named Caxinas Point. But as the mapmakers have not traveled in this part of the world in their depiction, they fall into a grievous error, of which I wish to speak, though it break the thread of my story. They depict those islands and that part of the mainland twice on their charts, as if they were different lands. Thus, although Cape Gracias a Dios is the same as that which they call Cape Honduras, they make two of it. The reason for their error is this. After the admiral had discovered those lands, one Juan Diaz de Solis, after whom the Rio de la Plata is called Rio de Solis, because he was slain by Indians there, and Vicente Yanez Pinzon, who commanded a ship on the admiral's first voyage, set out together in 1508 on a voyage of discovery, with the intention of following westward the coast that the admiral had discovered on his voyage to Veragua. Holding on that course, they sailed along the coast of Cariay, up past Cape Gracias a Dios to Caxinas Point, which they named Cape Honduras. The islands they called the Guanajas, giving the name of the principal island to the whole group. From there they proceeded onward, never admitting that the admiral had been in those parts, in order to assign the discovery to themselves, although one of their pilots, Pedro de Ledesma, who had sailed with the admiral on his voyage to Veragua, told them he knew that country and had helped the admiral discover it. This I later had from him. The charts clearly show this, for they depict that island twice, with the same shape and in the same position. The reason is that they brought back a map on which that country was accurately sketched, but they claimed it lay beyond the one the admiral had discovered. That is why the same land is shown twice on the map, as will become manifest when the navigation of that coast, with God's help, is better known. Having come to the island of Guanaja, the admiral sent ashore his brother Bartholomew with 2 boats. They encountered people who resembled those of the other islands, but had narrower foreheads. They also saw many pine trees and pieces of earth called calcite, which the Indians used to cast copper. Some of the sailors thought it was gold and kept it concealed for a long time. The Adelantado being eager to learn the secrets of that island, by good fortune there arrived at that time a canoe, long as a galley and 8 feet wide, made of a single tree trunk, like the other Indian canoes. It was freighted with merchandise from the western regions around New Spain. Amidships it had a palm leaf awning, like that which the Venetian gondolas carry. This gave complete protection against the rain and waves. Under this awning were the children and women, and all the baggage and merchandise. There were 25 paddlers aboard, but they offered no resistance when our boats drew up to them. Our men brought the canoe alongside the flagship, where the admiral gave thanks to God for revealing to him in a single moment, without any toil or danger to our people, all the products of that country. He took aboard the costliest and handsomest things in that cargo, cotton mantles and sleeveless shirts embroidered and painted in different designs and colors, breechclouts of the same design and cloth as the shawls worn by the women in the canoe, being like the shawls worn by the Moorish women of Granada. long wooden swords with a groove on each side where the edge should be, in which were fastened with cord and pitch, flint knives that cut like steel, hatchets resembling the stone hatchets used by the other Indians, but made of good copper, and hawksbells of copper, and crucibles to melt it. For provisions they had such roots and grains as the Indians of Hispaniola eat, also a wine made of maize that tasted like English beer. They had as well many of the almonds which the Indians of New Spain use as currency, and these the Indians in the canoe valued greatly. For I noticed that when they were brought aboard with the other goods, and some fell to the floor, all the Indians squatted down to pick them up, as if they had lost something of great value, their greed driving out their feelings of terror and danger at finding themselves in the hands of such strange and ferocious men as we must have seemed to be. I should add that they displayed admirable modesty, for if one had his breech clout taken from him, he would immediately cover his genitals with his hands, and the women covered their faces like the Moorish women of Granada. The admiral was so impressed by this that he ordered his people to treat them well and gave them some trading truck in exchange for what our men had taken from them. He detained only one, an ancient named Yumbe, who seemed to be the wisest man among them, and of greatest authority, to inform him about the secrets of that land and to persuade the others to talk to the Christians. He served us very willingly and loyally all the time we were in the region where his speech was understood. Having come to the limits of the area in which his language was spoken, the admiral gave him some presents and sent him home very satisfied. This happened before we reached Cape Gracias a Dios, on the Costa de las Orejas. Chapter 90. How the admiral decided not to go to New Spain, but turn eastward in search of Veragua and the strait across the mainland. The find of that canoe and its contents made the admiral aware of the great wealth, civilization, and industry of the people of the western part of New Spain. Reflecting, however, that as these lands were to the leeward, he could sail thither from Cuba whenever he wished, he decided to continue with his search for a strait across the mainland that would open a way to the South Sea and the lands of spices. So, like one groping in the darkness, he sailed eastward toward Veragua en nombre de Dios, believing the strait must be there, and so it was. But his mistake consisted in conceiving it to be a channel running from sea to sea, instead of a neck of land, or isthmus, as others did. This error may have arisen from a misunderstanding, for being told the strait was in Veragua en nombre de Dios, and the word strait, meaning either a land or water strait, he understood it in the latter sense, as the most common, and as signifying what he fervently sought for. Be that as it may, that land strait proved to be the doorway through which Spain entered upon the dominion of many seas, and one by means of which great treasure has been discovered and conveyed to Spain. So it was through the finding of that canoe that the existence of New Spain was first made known, for God was pleased that this great end should be achieved in that way and no other. As there was nothing of importance in those Guanaja Islands, he did not tarry there, but made for a point of the mainland that he called Caxinas Point, from the name of a tree that grew there. This tree produces fruit resembling wrinkled olives, with a spongy core that are good to eat, especially when cooked. The Indians of Hispaniola call these fruit caxinas. As this country contained nothing worthy of mention, the admiral lost no time in exploring a large bay that he found there, but held on his course eastward along the coast that runs to Cape Gracias a Dios. This coast is very low and open all the way. The Indians in the vicinity of Point Caxinas were dressed like those in the canoe, in dyed shirts and breechclouts. They also had thick, quilted, cotton jerkins like breastplates that were sufficient protection against their darts and even withstood some blows from our swords. But the people who live farther east, as far as Cape Gracias a Dios, are almost black in color, ugly in aspect, wear no clothes, and are very wild in all respects. According to the Indian who was our prisoner, they eat human flesh and raw fish, and pierce holes in their ears large enough to insert hen's eggs. That is why the admiral named that country Costa de las Orejas. On Sunday morning, August 14th, 1502, accompanied by the captains and many of the fleet's people, the Adelantado went ashore with his banners displayed to hear Mass. The Wednesday following, when boats were sent ashore to take formal possession of the land in the name of the Catholic sovereigns, more than 100 Indians, bearing food, came down to the shore. As soon as the boats had beached, they presented these gifts to the Adelantado, and went some distance off without saying a word. The Adelantado ordered them repaid with hawks' bells, beads, and other trifles. He also asked them about the resources of the region by signs and with the aid of the Indian interpreter. But this interpreter, having been but a short time with us, did not understand the Christians because of the distance, short though it is, separating his country from Hispaniola, where many of the ship's people had learned the Indians' language. Nor did he understand the Indians of that locality. These Indians, being pleased with what had been given them, next day more than 200 others came to the same spot, bringing food of various kinds. Chickens that were better tasting than ours, geese, roast fish, red and white beans, resembling kidney beans, and other commodities like those of Hispaniola. The land, though flat, was verdant and lovely, with many pines and evergreen oaks, myrobalans of the kind called hobos in Hispaniola, and almost all the other fruits and foods found in Hispaniola. There were also many pumas, stags, and roe deer, and many of the fish found in Hispaniola but not in Spain. The natives of this country are much like those on the other islands, but their foreheads are not so broad, and they do not appear to have any religion. They speak different languages and generally go naked, except for a cloth about their genitals. Some wear sleeveless shirts resembling ours that come down to the navel. They tattoo their arms and bodies by burning in Moorish-style designs that give them a strange aspect. Some display painted lions, others deer, others turreted castles, and others a variety of other figures. The most noble ones wear certain pieces of white and red cotton cloth instead of caps. Others have large locks of hair hanging over their foreheads. When they adorn themselves for some festivity, some paint their faces black or red. Others draw stripes of various colors on their faces, or put on a beak like an ostrich, and still others blacken their eyes. They do this to appear beautiful, but they really look like devils.